First off, I want to say good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the opening weekend of In the Midst of the Imagined. I'm Auttrianna Ward, I'm the curator of the exhibition. And so today, what I want to do is have a discussion about the reimagining of ourselves, and kind of answer to the LUCILLE quote that's here. And this, a part of this exhibition is rooted and supported by conversations about reparations that are currently going on in San Francisco, Sacramento, and statewide. So we wanted to bridge the conversations together because a lot of the work in the show is about repairing and restoring and reimagining. So I'm gonna ask a few questions. I'm gonna have everyone introduce themselves, and then I'm gonna ask a few questions. And it's also, I think it's Sunday, it's chill, you can do community style, like roundtable style, if folks wanna ask more questions or answer some of the questions that I posed. So we can go from left to right. And these are all the artists in the exhibition. So it's Nandi Jordan, Leah King, Aama, and Samantha, and Rebecca. Oh, it's been a long week. It's okay. And Gbenga. So I'm gonna have everyone introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work in the show and their work in general.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So much family. So excited. Nandi Jordan. I am an artist. I am a wife and mother. I wear many hats, but I've found that art really is a thread that goes across all roles that I play in my life. My art practice really grew out of me looking for a way to make sense of the world as I've kind of studied it. I have my PhD in sociology, and I am a child of two academics. And that world, especially a world of books, if you know academics, they come with lots of books, I found myself wanting to create a new language around the world as I've studied it versus the world as I have experienced it, and some of those contradictions that I experienced. So my practice, I use book pages, some for the actual text and some for the texture that they provide. And so the works that I'm showing in this show are from a body of work called Let Me Be Magic, which is really about thinking about some of the burdens of Black girl magic and what it means to exist as a Black woman, given kind of these kind of ideals and the reality. And so I'm very much so in the midst of that series. I'm still grappling with it, but it's really exciting to share the work as it exists right now. So, yeah, sure.
Thanks, Nandi. Hi, my name's Leah King. I'm from Brooklyn by way of Oakland. I just moved to LA last year, so thanks for having me. And I'm a musician and dancer first. I just came to visual art during the pandemic as a journey to kind of, I guess, synthesize a lot of the creative feelings and creative fervor that I had that had no place when we were in lockdown. And a whole lot of stuff came out of that. And I found it, as Nandi was saying, actually to be a great bridge of the many hats that I wear as well. So I consider myself more of a multimedia and installation artist because I do so much live music and sound and sort of collaborative work with so many different folks in different kinds of disciplines. And a lot of the journey of the work is about finding joy through pain. So it's really about embracing joy, all different ways that joy can look, while we acknowledge all the different types of pains and traumas that maybe brought us to that place of exquisite joy. So a lot of the works that I have here are collage featuring family members. So I have a big series called Diasporic Futurism that only features found photos of my family members that I had this big trove of photos, and my grandparents passed away, that they had just like boxes and boxes of photos, and I started going through them, and I was like, these are sick, like there's so many beautiful things. And so that's my uncle back in the corner there, and he told me that was like I guess on the beach in like France or something, because my grandfather was in the military. So, you know, it's all about like how journeys and traveling through space and time can also be this way of thinking about different futures. So in connection to this reparations conversation, I thought that these works were really great at sort of redefining and sort of renaming a lot of the weights and the sort of like the complicated histories and the complicated family stories that many of us have, that we want to just sort of refocus on as we move forward. And I'm sure we'll get deeper into that in the conversation, but that's just a little bit of kind of where my work is headed. Yeah. Oh, and also moving forward, a lot of it will have audio to be like in conversation with the works themselves.
Hi, my name is Akuya Shabaka. I am co-founder of the fashion brand House of Aama with my mother. And so we are designers, but we also look at ourselves as folklorists and archivists. And really through our design process, we build worlds and we create characters that are in these worlds. And they're informed by history, research, our family narratives. And so for this exhibition, we decided to showcase our saltwater film, which was it came from our saltwater collection, but we decided to do a film because we felt like it made the most sense to create this world that we built, which was Camp Aama, which was inspired by the lost but not forgotten resort communities that existed in the Americas, as well as just the seafaring and water deities that anchor us here on this land. And so we've been dabbling into like just the film space, installation work, just as other ways to express our creative process outside of just the garments. But the garments are essentially like a vehicle for the stories that we're telling.
Yes. I will co-sign all of that. And we're both the designers, we're both the creatives. We do have a division of labor in the business though. I'm also a lawyer, been a lawyer for 30 years. And that does inform our research process, it informs our archival analysis, and it informs some of the storytelling and the perspective and how we choose to present the stories that we then base textile collections around in our fashion brand. And I will say, in terms of the subject matter that we focus on, we tend to focus on, I would say, the postbellum South. We're very intent in our brand, which we are positioning ourselves, and we are a legacy brand. We're a legacy brand just by the virtue of the fact that we're mother and daughter, but we're also a legacy brand in terms of the content and what we choose to talk about in this space, especially in this space on this soil, in which we talk about the Black experience. We're specifically and explicitly in the fashion world focused on the Black experience. Just as I was telling you the other day, how Ralph Lauren is focused on the Western narrative and all that revolves around that. And so we often speak upon what we present as being a part of Americana. And in presenting this part of Americana, or this slice of the Black experience, we also focus on the African diaspora and the Caribbean islands as one continuous narrative. And so in regards to the reparations conversation, we can get into that, I guess, a little bit later as we dialogue. I also have some history in that in terms of my experience as a lawyer at Gbenga that have been very instrumental in COBRA. That was one of the instrumental organizations working on that question. And so now, 30 years later, to see where that journey has taken us is very interesting to me in terms of where I have seen that conversation beginning and the advocacy work in that in our imagined futures.
Hi, I'm Gbenga. I'm also an artist, and among other things. Well, I thought y'all had a lot of beautiful things to say, and I want to second all of it. I feel like Nandi said, my practice has been like a really helpful way of understanding, how I come to know myself and sort of our interactions with society and the symbols that we embody and use to form narratives about ourselves, and that's sort of where all the work has come from. I sometimes feel hesitant calling them self-portraits because I imbue them with narratives and references from other myths, but all the pieces, feel like they reflect different angles of me that still feel universal in a sense. And then also exploring specifically the Black experience, specifically as it comes to the diaspora and the similarities, but also the vast differences of what it looks like and feels like to be Black around the world.
So I want to thank everyone and read again the quote. Who among us can imagine ourselves unimagined? So the initial conversation was between Gbenga and Nandi and Leah and I, and Leah brought up that poem. And I wanted to think about how do we define imagination in this space? How do we define, what does that quote mean to you? And so folks in the audience can listen to talk about it.
It feels to me like being a Black woman. It feels like being invisible. I think I might be the oldest person here. And so one of the things I really appreciate about the younger people, this is my daughter, who's probably one of the younger people here, is the bravery that seems to be the chorus in how you live. Those birds, and Nandi and I are also related, so I had a chance to talk to her about the birds and the flight and the freedom and the movement created by all those shadows. To me, is very emblematic of how I see my daughter, how I see Nandi's generation, which is literally, I think, a generation ahead of her. So without giving a whole lot of detail, she's in her 20s, Nandi's in her 40s, I'm in my 60s. There's a bridge, but there is an unapologeticness that we did not have the courage to live. I don't want to take too long. Hair is a real political statement in our world, and you guys are not having that conversation anymore in the way we had it. I remember walking into the Walt Disney Company as a consultant. So I'd been there a few years. I came back for a project, and one of my Black colleagues said, "Are you really going into the meeting like that? Look at your hair." And it was just braids at the time. Like I said, just braids, right? It wasn't like woolly twist crazy stuff. You guys aren't having that conversation. So for me, I think you're saying I'm not invisible. And I think we thought that sometimes it was to our benefit to be invisible. And I'm not sure about that. And I'm not sure what the answer is. So, thank you.
I think when I look at this question here, and I love this because she's one of my favorite poems, I cannot imagine myself unimagined. I think that question also brings me to the work of Auttrianna Ward. It's been really pivotal for us as a mentor and an icon and an ancestor. That I think is really critical for Black people to be able to see themselves in the past, present, and the future, and to really understand that continuum that we exist and that we ride on. I think that to imagine ourselves is to imagine ourselves in techno full color. And I think that when I close my eyes at night and my ancestors are speaking to me, that's how they speak to me is very vivid. And so I think that what we're tasked with in this present time, especially as we have like these reparation conversations, and I was talking to my daughter, I'm 56, I really couldn't have imagined when I was her age how far we would have been sliding back, or how far this country and the world in some respects is sliding to the right. And so I think that in terms of who we are as a people, and our declaration and our Kuchichagalia and our sovereignty, I think that there has never been more of a time for us to be serious about who we are as a people, and to be about the business of who we are as a people, because the forces that are aligned against us, and I was just telling this to my daughter this morning, they are serious about their mission and cause, and they are organized, and they have declared a declaration of war. And if we don't really recognize the moment that we're in terms of that, we're not going to be in a good shape in terms of our descendants in the next 10 to 20 years. Because we're at a very critical time here on this planet with the forces that are aligned against us. And we have to be really serious about who we are as a people and the positions that we're taking and the work that we're willing to do to generate, to determine that our future descendants are going to have a world to live in as free and sovereign people.
So, thank you for asking off of that. I think that's really an interesting thing to think about because it's like anytime political progress is made, there's always like a shift, like a reactionary shift, and we're living through that. But I think the problem is like imagination is based on reference. Like you can't imagine things if you don't have like information to inform the imagination, and imagination is really just like rearranging what you already know. Like you never really create anything that's new, you just rearrange things so that it's not as recognizable. But I think as Black people in America, our only reference, or most of our only reference, is based on white America and like the information that white America has had. So one of those references is individualism. Like we're focused on like what we can achieve for ourselves financially in our lifetime instead of focusing on a legacy that won't impact us, like that won't like impact our own selfish desires during our lifetime, but it'll impact people in the future. And I think that's a really Western concept because in a lot of like African communities or indigenous communities, there's like a connection to your ancestors and like the legacy that they passed down to you. And we don't have that that's cut off for us. So I think part of imagining ourselves in like this unimagined space is trying to get more information from the people before us because we keep looking ahead when a lot of answers to these problems have actually been given to us hundreds of years before. And so it's kind of funny, like I was talking to Gbenga earlier about how my major in college is about innovation, like technological innovation, but I realized one fundamental disconnect between me and the rhetoric that my professors teach us is that we have to create something new. And I think part of that is being individual and wanting to be able to take credit for like giving this new idea to the world, when there are a lot of solutions that our ancestors created before us that we can just reintroduce to Western society, and I feel like we're not focused on that yet. So that was kind of roundabout, but yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, especially the work that's on view people, like in many ways that's what the birds were about for me and why it was so important for there to be a shadow that's part of the work and not just like them being flat against the wall, because there is this kind of like, it's like this like other side that is that is part of your existence, you know? And I think when I was, you know, while I've been like really working through this series and figuring out like, what is this thing that I'm trying to tap into, I think some of it is the space between the shadow and the thing, you know? And so it's not necessarily like just to show that the shadow exists, but to actually navigate the space in between and explore what that feels like to be like in a kind of liminal state. And I think there's actually a lot in our history as Black Americans that is comfortable with that or familiar with that, but it's so antithetical to Western modern capitalism. You know, it's so, it feels so counter. I mean, and one of the things I really loved about your film and watching your film is that it's like somewhere in between the reality and the fantasy of a place and a space, and like, you know, it almost doesn't feel real, and it's not real, it's not a real thing, but it is a real thing, and it's something we've lost, you know. And I grew up with my mom telling me stories about going to Idlewild every summer because she was from Chicago, and that's where her family and friends went. And it's like, or I was just talking to someone last night about, I can't remember, but somewhere here in Southern California, Valverde,
it's at Santa Clarita.
Yes, I was talking about Valverde and like these communities, these places, and so kind of not losing, you know, so some of it is like I'm trying to work out like how to not lose that space in between in this name of progress, in the name of like pushing forward and innovating and putting my name on something and it's mine and I did it, but trying to like stretch into that space and be uncomfortable, you know, allow myself to be like, you don't have to fit into this particular way of like navigating through the world as a Black person, especially as a Black woman. And a lot of the works that I'm, you know, working through, I'm really trying to think about like the things that were passed down, you know, I'm thinking specifically about from our mothers or from our grandmothers that is like, you don't know that you've been given it until it's in your hand and you're wielding it at people and they're like, what are you doing? And you're like, oh, what is this? Where did this come from? You know, and so, I think that's something that I've just like been really unpacking as a wife, as a mother, like as a sister and, you know, daughter and all these things that I'm like, what is this thing that what are we sending, you know, thinking about my daughter, like we're sending these kids out into the world with. And so it's encouraging to think about the conversations that were had that we're not having now. That's like, oh, that's progress. And then it's also interesting to think about like how to be uncomfortable, you know, how to exist in an uncomfortable space comfortably. So.
And that's why I think it's like really important to have these generational conversations and to have multiple generations in one room, because I feel like similar to what you were saying, there's so much that we can gain from the past to then imagine our future and to not forget. And I think, you know, it's just interesting to see how things are happening even in the educational systems right now, where we're essentially like being targeted for losing like the information and the history that is important for us to be able to look at the past and see our progress, see our downfalls. And, you know, it's a very interesting time. And so when I think about the quote, especially the first part where she's saying, who among us can imagine ourselves unimagined? It just makes me think about these outer forces, these other just systems and governments in place that are essentially like propelling us to unimagine ourselves. And it's very problematic. Yeah.
It's interesting too, also because I feel like, because once again, the imagination is based on reference. Like when you have those intergenerational conversations, like older people will think of things like as revolutionary, but like it's revolutionary in their time period.
Yeah.
But then the younger people are more radical, and then it's like kind of hard to convince some older people that it's the legacy that they set, and it's not wrong that they're not used to it. Like, I don't know, it's just, and then also it's interesting because there's like older people I grew up around, and they're like, when you get older, like you'll stop being so liberal, like you'll get conservative when you realize how the world really works. And I'm like, the more books I read, the more radical I become. Like it's the complete opposite. But I think that once again, it's access to information. Like we're only given access to such a small amount of our history, and like there's ways that I never thought that my ideology would shift. That it did shift when I just started to explore like more things. But once again, it's like we're deliberately not given access to certain information, or if you can't get access to it, like you have to have a lot of privileges that most people don't have. And then even if you do have that privilege, some people are not interested. Like you have to have a genuine interest to get that information and be receptive to it.
Yeah. Something I've been thinking about, Rebecca, since we talked about seeing the reparations conversation, I wanted to talk, if you could address ways you've seen it grow and change.
Well, when I first was in law school in 90 to 93 at UCLA, so I was in an organization called the National Conference of Black Lawyers. And NCBL, the stated main objective of that particular legal organization was to be the legal arm of the Black Revolution. And so that was an organization that started in the 50s and 60s, very, very different than just your regular legal type of organizations that we have. And so when I first encountered them, that was still the same page that they were on, even in 90. And the people that were in the leadership of that organization, also in the leadership of NCOBRA, and also NAPA, which is the organization that was setting aside the 5 southern states, you know, as a land base for African people, given our history in this country. And so I was seeing those conversations that had been going on before I joined that organization about reparations, and seeing the roadblocks that those particular elders were running into with trying to move it nationally. And so from that time to this time, I've seen that conversation ebb and flow. And so I have been paying attention to the conversations nationally and here in California in regards to reparations. I mean, is reparations something that, you know, African people, descendants of African people are entitled to? Definitely yes. Is it a debt? Definitely yes. The question that I have is that in order to, and is there a precedent? Is there a legal precedent for it? Has it been paid up? Definitely yes. Then the question becomes, when you have to go to people and ask them to pay that debt, you have to move the moral needle. And from what I'm seeing of these people that you have to go and ask that question to, I'm not seeing the moral needle being moved in a way that's favorable to the people that are asking for the reparations, in my opinion. Because everything that I'm seeing on a daily basis is with the powers that be not even acknowledging that there is a moral question that needs to be addressed. And a denial that there's a moral question that they feel responsible for in the present time. So when you talk about, like in Florida and these other states, erasing the history and legislating the erasure of the history, it just begs the question, then how do you get that? Because you're asking for people to give you something.
Yeah.
And so that's just where my observation is of where we're at, because I know as a lawyer from working in the legal system that you can be firm on your position and you can be a firm advocate of your position. But being a firm advocate and having a strong position and moving the needle and having somebody else effectuate the remedy are two different things. And so I just really wonder of the jurisdiction of that question being one in which we're gonna see any redress, realistically. That's just my position.
Yeah, and I think something that's been a concern to me personally is the sort of divisiveness that's come about where there's become, instead of the conversation being about what are reparations, it's been who of people that look like us deserve them, and there's been this sort of like wanting to quarter and divide Black people who are in the United States based off of some things that are sometimes based off of regions that people come from, and then sometimes based off of really historical understandings of the slave trade in America, in the Americas. So I think it's really important to have this conversation about reimagining what reparations are, because obviously from what they were supposed to be 150 years ago is not what would even make sense now. So what are things that we would like to see as reparations? Like for me, I'm a huge proponent of education, being a part of reparations, and not just education to Black people, but education about Black people, education about Indigenous people in the Americas, and just thinking about being 18 and moving to New York and not knowing that there were Black people outside of the US and Africa, because I grew up in California, and the people who I sometimes now recognize as clearly of African descent certainly weren't telling me that they were. And but then also it's just that it was about the English speaking Black experience. And so I think it's really important to be intentional and internationalist. That's my perspective. But yeah, I wanted to talk about what are reparations? What are things that people think about for reparations? Including money, not including money, or et cetera. So that's what I'm doing.
I definitely agree that education is the most important thing, and I think that also providing people with like mental health resources would be really helpful too, because I feel like trauma is so normalized in the Black community, and it's directly tied to socioeconomics, but even like in spaces where people are privileged, like for instance USC, there's still a lot of tension because we have to deal with so many different social forces that drive us apart. Like I was thinking about how at SC, we always make jokes that like, if you're a blonde sorority girl, of course you're gonna have a fun time at USC, like you might not, but the chances of having fun are so much higher because that space is for you, and then also there's less like social issues to fight about, you know, like in the white community, whereas in the Black community, there's colorism, there's like misogyny, like there's all these different social forces, there's homophobia, and it's very racialized. So like it makes the learning environment like a bit more difficult, because learning is, I think, really influenced by your cohort and like learning from your peers. And when there's all these wedges driven between you, it makes it really hard to learn. So I feel like some type of like community building or like especially education around those issues and helping people work through the social aspects of that would get us a lot further than that.
So, you know, your name's
Auttrianna.
Auttrianna, Pamela. A lot of the questions are quite profound that I think are being asked today. One of the things that pops into my head, and I have to confess I absolutely love her work, Isabel Wilkerson, who has recently written Caste. I think that her first book, The Warmth of Other Suns, should actually be required reading for anyone to graduate from high school, no matter their color in this country, because it is quite a comprehensive look at America. And America doesn't exist without all of the people in this room, whether you picked continent or not. She is, to me, a master of the metaphor. When she talks about the old house, and I don't know if everybody's read it, I'll try to be as quick as possible, but she says, you know, in the answer to, but I'm not the slave holder, right? Because many of us probably had some experience where a white person, well-intended or not, says, but I wasn't the one that owned the plantation, and I wasn't the one that whipped, and I wasn't the one that shot, and I wasn't the one. But that's not the issue. The issue, as she so, to me, masterfully points out, is when you go buy an old house, if we say America is basically symbolic of the old house, that we inherit everything in the old house, that what we were buying was the beautiful molding and the fireplace and all of that. But if the pipes break, we don't say it's not my responsibility to fix the pipe, because we don't want the house to be destroyed. And so I think until we force a different language in our own community, which I think she has started to plant seeds of, we can't language properly to the ask. I don't remember your name. Rebecca. So I think Rebecca is right about, you know, who you have to ask, but it's not impossible to get what we want. But I think we are as responsible for educating those that we have to ask as we are ourselves. And I think if we start to really reimagine the language, really think about the caste system, really be honest about the fact that brown and black people are not the same people. Brown people believe that they are different than black people. I happen to be a first-generation American. My parents immigrated from Panama. My mother, who was born in 1929, was allowed to go to the school. There was no quote-unquote segregation. But though she was an honor student, she was not allowed to learn how to swim because she might turn the water a color. And she was being educated by men who were saying, you girls have to be educated so that you can go out in the world and make your way and what have you. But Constante, you can't swim. So in my house, racism was international. I bring that up only because I grew up in a house in Brooklyn. My babysitter was a Mexican, but most of the Hispanics at the time were Puerto Rican. It was very clear to us that when push came to shove, that caste system that Isabel Wilkerson so eloquently points out, that we in our country talk about as race, was really, really clear. When it came down to arguing over Skelly or whose turn it was on the handball court, somebody was going to say something very different because of where they thought they were wrong. So I think that we have to change our vocabulary, because I think it will drive our insight. I think it will drive us really understanding what we want. I think we have to get money. Money is just whatever you trade, right, for goods and services. And we can't live. Nobody can live. We couldn't live when there was a barter system without some, way to trade goods and services. So, and as women especially, I think we're often taught that, maybe you shouldn't really ask because it means that you're this. I think we have to get money. because you need the money to be educated, right? You need the money so that you can satisfy your basic needs, so that you can feed your child the right vegetables and fruits so they can go to class and concentrate. So I don't think we should be shy about the economic piece. I agree with you on education, but I think it has to be really, really thought out. I think we're too narrow in what we define as education. Reading and writing are the baseline. I think thinking and synthesizing and ensuring that that's what happens is really, really important. When you look at organizations back in, I guess, like the 70s in New York City, like the East, folks who were driving the renaming of Medgar Evers College and all of those people, they were talking about not just reading and writing, and I think that's what made them so powerful and so scary at the same time for both white and black people. Because we, I think in this conversation, are saying that we also, and some of what Nandi is talking about and some of what Leah is talking about, and these two lovely ladies in Gbenga are all talking about, is not being afraid to step out onto the ledge, because it's going to take a risk.
You get land too.
Money.
Need some land.
Land is money, right? Right?
Yes.
And not the house on top of the land. When we bought our house, it was very interesting. The deed said we don't own what's underneath it. Here in California, not too far from here, we don't own the stuff underneath. But we have to make sure that if somebody trips on the sidewalk, right? So that's you're right, the land.
The land itself, the soil. It's simple and not, yes, it's complicated and it's simple. When you really look at it, when you really look at what's owed, I think that especially the 1619 project when that came out, and it talked about just all of the different ways in the modern world that you can look at the effects, and looking at the effects and how you can calculate the damage. I remember just reading an article in the 1619 project. It talked about the modern accounting system. It talked about the consumption of sugar, and the implications in the medical system, tolerance of pain. In addition to just the quantifiable loss of land, money, opportunity, generational wealth. So when you take away all of that from one group of people, and you don't have it running down generations. But it is inherited in another group of people where it continues to run down the generations. You cannot deny that. Because you have people that have and you have people that don't have. And you have people that have and don't have because of the systemic issue regarding slavery and the failure to redress the wrongs when they should have been redressed. And the attempts that were made to redress it during the Freedoms Bureau and different attempts that were made to pass, at the time of emancipation and shortly thereafter, those attempts were thwarted. So you have to put a dollar figure on that. You have to address it in the modern era so that the modern day descendants are made right, like we say in the legal aspect. You have to make people whole.
Right.
And so making people whole involves money and quantification of the damage.
And even if you go just as far back as the New Deal, like FDR is held up as this wonderful icon who drove the best interests of working class Americans. Well, Black people have always been working class, but we were absolutely legislated out of accessing those funds. So if we just go back to that era and count the dollars. So there is a way to absolutely figure out how to do this. But we, I think, have to have our history tight so we can pull down the real facts to some extent, it doesn't matter that, you know, whomever is trying to legislate it out, we have library cards. No, really, and I was just reading an article today about, I don't want to say the name because I just don't even want to speak that name out into the universe, but nevertheless, somehow their book has disappeared from online, soon to be presidential candidate. That's probably not by accident, but we have to do what all other people do, which is go find our own culture, hold it, know it in the context of this whole conversation so that we can be absolutely articulate in what we're asking for and that it be founded in real facts, dollars, and numbers. Because we can calculate those numbers from just that point in time, right?
Yeah, before.
We can take all of those people who should have gotten some of that money, it was Social Security, they gave us the you know, WPA and all of those things, which is wonderful because that helped to preserve our culture, but then they sure did not give us money because they know, right?
Well, the figures, a lot of those figures are in the books because we were property. And so, you know, that's where a lot of the numbers have been found because, you know, as I was saying, the modern day accounting system was based upon slave records.
Yeah.
And so those records, you know, for the most part, are fairly accurate where they exist because that's how the property was counted and that's how life insurance policies and other things were taken out on bodies.
Yeah.
One thing I just want to add to is that, like, sometimes the reparations conversation feels like a little fringe to me. Like, it is, like, not a conversation on the level that we're having it that is being had by, like it's there's like a top line of it, like, you know, oh ha ha ha, I'll get a check for something one day, you know? And so what I'm really appreciating about this conversation is I feel like I'm even coming to recognize my own biases towards the history of the conversation itself. And like and recognizing the various levels at which I've been in it or not been in it. And I wonder if that's maybe also part of the challenge, is that it comes with its own, like I'm just imagining, like, yeah, like I just think about like how we, like, there are so many ways in which Black culture drives American culture. And then I was just imagining what if reparations was part of that versus it feeling like, and I do feel like, especially in California and recently, there's like the fact that it's like in the news repeatedly, again, California reparations, they're talking about it, they took it to Newsom, it's feeling less like, you know, kind of like,
Spectacle.
yeah, like less of a spectacle.
Yeah.
And I think like,
But I think we have to be careful in that context too, because if the people who don't really understand who we are culturally, like really understand, are in that room with them,
yeah,
what we get awarded may not really be suitable.
right, yeah, because they're not even really they're just on the side of giving, you know, like how you talked about, like, you have to go, you know, going to ask to pay a debt, you know? And so if they're not even like attuned to the full scope of the conversation, then how are they gonna be able to make us whole?
Well, I think that's also what I love so much about what you're talking about, even the books that you're mentioning, right? So Cast, or what the 1619 Project is doing, or even Kendi's work, like there are so many beautiful books that are coming out now about really the history of disenfranchisement. And I feel like so many people who are involved in the conversation of reparations actually don't know the math behind and the hardcore history of the specific numbers of the disenfranchisement and how that had to trickle down, like not even just trickle down, but that has this like significant impact on how the economy of the United States functions today. And so many of the conversations are incredibly surface level. I was so disheartened to see this week. So Auttrianna and I are from San Francisco, where, as many folks know, the Black population has been systemically kicked out for a very long time. Gone from, I think, 13% down to 5 or 4% now, 3%, hey. So, and
You can still round up though.
So it's more like,
right, yeah. So, and then there's a conversation happening right now about $5 million checks being written or whatever. And so there was this article in the New York Times about it. And I was like, oh, this is the I'm like texting everybody, like, hey, like, what are we gonna do? And then I looked at the comment section. And this is the New York Times, where you are assuming you've got your white liberal bleeding heart folks. Not at all, not at all. The ignorance of what was happening there, of the intention behind the quote unquote payments, or the intentions behind the conversation on reparations, it was all missing. No one seemed to understand any of these things. And it's because there's a lot of reasons, obviously, why people don't know anything about why the conversation of reparations is even happening. But a lot of that comes down to, just as you were saying, the violence around the lack of education, and the fact that we have to actively fight to learn Black history. It's like scraping and crawling, and like now we have the internet, right? But I feel like, as a child, even going to my local library, even going to my school library, I was not able to find Black history. I wasn't able to learn about anything other than what I was learning from my elders, from my family, from family reunions, etc. And so now there's more access to learn a bit about the history of what happened and what's still happening. But so many folks are having a more emotional conversation around the peripheral aspects of what they think they hear. Because a lot of times, as we've seen in a lot of cool memes, right, a lot of people don't look as equity as everybody being on an even playing field. They think of it as people who have more have to give up, and they're gonna be kicked off of this pedestal that they've been on. Well, that might be an ultimate thing that happens, but it's not that they necessarily are supposed to give up everything that they've ever known, and it's this constant. Actually, like for me, like in my revolutionary space, yes, that is, I think, what's true. Yeah. Well, for me, it got much more personal a couple of years ago, because my family was doing a deep dive on our history as my uncle was running for the governor of Maryland. And so he and my father started doing this big deep dive into our family history. And then we found a cabin where my great-great-great-grandparents lived in while enslaved is still standing in Maryland. And the family that owned them is still living in the house adjacent to the cabin.
Wow.
And so my family members, my cousin who was here yesterday, her mom went to the house and knocked on the door and was like, hey, so this cabin right here, my ancestors lived in it, can I check it out, etc. And the first comment they had was, what do you want? Why are you here? Oh no, kind of thing. In large part, what she wanted was for them to take all the trash that they had been storing in the cabinet out of it and really acknowledge and recognize it as a historical space, and really looking at where our family was and who they could have been, and then these unmarked graves that exist all over this property. Mark those again, find those tombstones, find those gravestones, acknowledge and respect the people who lived here. So much of my extended family has been asking me, as like the artist in the family or whatever, they're like, oh, check it out, take pictures, see what you think of this cabin. I don't really know, and I mean, I hear a lot of what you're saying in regards to how the generations, like what we think of as radical, because I'm in my 40s now, and I always get worried that I was more radical in my 20s, but then things like this happen, and I'm like, I don't know if I'd be able to come there, chill, and just be able to hang out and look at the cabin and chill out with the fam and just be like, hey, I don't know if I would have that capacity, because I still see this systems of inequality. They are allowed to live in a house that their ancestors bought. I don't have a house, so I really see that, and I really feel that, and I feel like a lot of folks don't know how visceral and how specific that history is. It's because it's just.
But do you have to know before you get there? Maybe just go see. It's part of your piece. Just go see. And whatever unfolds.
True. Well, I'm all told that it is an art project that I'm working on. I do have a bunch of pictures of the cabin, and what I want to do is turn it into an immersive art experience. And I want to make it a space that would exist in a gallery setting like this that we could enter. Fun fact, it wouldn't necessarily be a cabin where enslaved people were living that you would enter into. Where I find my joy and my release is in the nightclub experience, is in dancing and partying, Studio 54-esque, glitter and sequins and champagne and what have you. That's fun for me. So that is more where I would like the cabin to be and what I would want my space to, like, how I would have it for me. So I don't really know what other people would want, that cabin to look like for them as we, re-understand and reinterpret. So Daoud Bey, is that his name, the photographer? He has a bunch of photographs of cabins as well that look so nearly identical to the architecture of this particular cabin. And so I just find that project really fascinating. The more that we can acknowledge that these structures, it's not ancient history. It's history that's right in front of us. It's things that are still happening. And that's so much that is missing in this reparations conversation. And I feel like one of the reasons I get so passionate about it is because, as a mixed person, I think in this context, I'm often unimagined in spaces because there isn't, the mixedness is kind of like this esoteric space of, well, you're here, you're there, you're not this, you're that, you're this, you're that. And I'm like, actually, there's a lot of power in that. There's multiple lineages, multiple ancestral stories, and I'm mixed with a Jewish lineage and a Jewish passage, right, of another diaspora, where I didn't look for my Jewish stories in school. I got that from synagogue, I got that from Hebrew school, I got that from all these other spaces and places where people were able to actually find a lot of our literature and our stories. And it was just such a different thing trying to find that in the Black context. So I think we do need to fight for this, and we do need to constantly be trying to, sing from the mountaintops or whatever it is that we need to do to make sure that folks know that this is the history, this is an active problem that's still happening right now, and we deserve an opportunity to rectify it.
I also think, and thank you, Leah, there's things that America did as a country, and then there's things that Europeans did, and I feel like the deck is a little bit larger than the conversation currently is being focused on. Like, America created the prison industrial complex, so reparations for that could be eventually abolition, but Europe, like when I spent the last year living in Europe, and when I went to Spain, I very much felt the same way I felt at Thomas Jefferson's house, where I was like, this money, this wealth came from us. It didn't just stop in Maryland, it didn't just stop in DC. And so I think I would like to see the reparations conversation expanded, because French people have a lot of money. French people owe a lot of people. They owe a lot of people that currently speak French in Africa. They owe Haitian people. They owe Haitian people. And also the borders that we have now weren't the borders that were always existent, right? Because it was Spain had Florida, or so what did that mean in terms of? I think about it. I would like to see the reparations conversation more spread in ideas of Blackness, less, while also considering the specific American legacy and what United States did. But United States didn't kidnap Africans in the 15th century, right? United States did not send Columbus to Dominican Republic and Haiti to kill people, right? So where is the responsibility for the other superpowers that exist? Because America's only been a superpower for the last 80, 90 years. So what, and so I think I would like for that to be an expansion and not a distraction. If possible.
I would love to add to your conversation, because I think what's coming up for me, and this goes back to the moral code that you were saying and speaking about, is that like the US and so many of these Western European colonial forces were built on white supremacy and slavery, and all of that was necessary to create capitalism. And I feel like that has created a kind of moral code that is like, that is propaganda that we're all being served, whether it's through laws or education or popular media. And so I think the conversation is a lot bigger, and I think the point that I'm getting at is, if Black people were truly given what they deserve by divine right, by, you know, like everything that we deserve, like for me, it would mean a complete transformation of this country. Would this country even exist as the United States of America? That's the question for me. And would Europe exist? You know, would borders exist? Like, I think reclaiming land, reconnecting with our relationship to land, switching our moral code, you know, going back to indigenous practices and even building upon them. And like, to me, I don't know if the United States of America would exist, and would that mean a new flag? Like, what could we imagine then? And so that's what's coming up for me.
Yeah, I was thinking along those lines when I was looking back at this quote again. I think some of the difficulty that, especially people of color, you know, African descendants and descendants of other people of color who have redress and wrongs to address in this country, is that really to get to where we would want to go is, I believe, for many unimaginable. Because it would require a transformation of what we currently have. And a different status quo. Because you cannot at the same time maintain the system and redress those wrongs adequately and make people whole. I mean, you can do it where you give people a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it's not going to change the fundamental structure of things. So you have all of these people with this, that in some respects are ill-gotten gains, and all of these people with nothing, because they've been deprived. So unless you do a complete address of that, you're always going to be faced with the inequity of it. And it was an inequitable system set up and designed for people to be at the top and other people to be at the bottom. And so it's no coincidence that you have people at the bottom. And in terms of the question of people not knowing, yeah, people know this history. People know this history, which is why there have been so many efforts before emancipation, right after emancipation, Jim Crow era, all the way up until the modern day, to not address the question, because they know about it. And that's why you have now all of these attempts to change what's taught in the curriculum and what's taught to people. Because the people and the powers that be, they know this history. And I think they also understand that in terms of the younger generations, younger generations see the inequities and see the inability in previous generations to address the wrongs and the methods that they were using. And so I think the younger generation is calling bullshit on bullshit and saying that in order for us to truly be sovereign and self-determining, we're going to have to approach it from a different angle and with different methods and with different means.
I think, like to that point and like to your point too, when you were saying like if we are to truly achieve this goal, we have to reimagine the entirety of this country, because our country is all based on black people's oppression, like it was literally built on our backs. I think that for that reason, we as black people have to be much more practical and realistic about what we want our futures to look like. Because for instance, like some black people's definition of progress is like Beyonce and Jay-Z being like the first black billionaires, and the fact that they just bought like a $200 million house, like the most expensive house ever sold in California, and that's still following the footprint of capitalism. So is that progress, or are black people now just able to occupy like these spaces that were only reserved for white people? And then there's like the other side of that spectrum where some people's definition of progress is completely overturning that idea. Like, I have met this man in Ghana, and he has this compound where he is completely self-sufficient. Like, he grows all of his own food, he makes his own flour. Like, it's actually pretty insane. But for that reason, because he's self-sufficient, like, he can only have certain foods at certain times of the year, because that's how nature is. Like, if you want mangoes, you're gonna have to wait till spring, and then you'll have like the 5 mangoes that are on your tree, and then you wait another year. But like, because we're used to capitalism, we're used to being able to consume things like very frequently, and we're like very used to having access to certain things. So if we truly want to rid ourselves of the disadvantages of these systems, we also have to get comfortable with the idea that like we are very accustomed to this system, and like you can't have both. You know?
It makes me think too about just like the conversation that we're having has a lot to do with our sense of urgency in terms of the mission that we would have to instill. And it does make me think about the other conversation about like black bodies and rest and our ability to, you know, relax. And it's interesting because I feel like sometimes that conversation probably is going to conflict the conversation of being on like a very urgent mission. And I think what's important for us to do in terms of like as a community is us creating those spaces where we can rest and we can feel safe while being on the mission. And I think that unfortunately, like even some of the younger generations are like, I don't want to be at the front lines. I don't want to, you know, take that mission on our backs, or maybe you have family members who have done it in the past. And sometimes when I think about like the older generations, you guys have way more urgency. And we're more radical, the younger generations, but we're also very comfortable with certain things that are happening in our society, or we're just being dangled like little fruits and we think that it's okay and we're getting a little piece of the pie. And so I guess my question is just about like where is the conflict between like the rest conversation and the mission at hand?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, that's really what this work is about for me, and like the kind of the wallpaper that's behind it is a lot of motifs are around kind of like these scars and these battle wounds that either we've taken on or have been passed on to us, and kind of thinking about like, you know, I love how you said being on mission and resting. And for me, I think that's where in my imagination I've been really kind of consumed with thinking about birds and what they represent in terms of like freedom and I mean, it's a combination of birds and like bird watching, like the book pages that are throughout these works are from a book that's called The Guide to Bird Watching that, you know, I just picked up, but like 15 years ago. But the whole idea being like, just this kind of tension between like structure, like a guide to bird watching, go outside and do this, and this is what the bird markings look like, da 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 da. And this like actually being in your body and being like, oh, what was that I just heard? Oh, that was a bird call. Well, you know, like that experience of like slowing down and being present. And so you know, even some of those conversations around rest, you know, once they've kind of been like hit the zeitgeist and like, you know, they've felt oppressive, like you need to go rest.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Slow down.
You're doing too much.
You're doing too much.
Talking too much.
Yes, and so sometimes
I feel that,
it feels
yeah.
like we're having to go rest and
Yeah.
hydrate.
I'm not resting enough.
I'm not you know, and
You're too
so
ambitious, you need a rest.
yeah, and so feeling that tension between that desire to just like, yeah, the soft life, like just wanting to like embrace that. And I think that's what was coming up for me when I started this series of thinking about Black Girl Magic, because and like why I've been thinking about like, well, okay, let me be magic, like let me, like it's not just, this is, I didn't wake up like this, you know what I'm saying? Like it's not, it's almost like to me in having, giving us power, it feels like it's taking it away. And some of that is like the pain and the trauma of living in the underbelly of this society, having seen it, having touched it, having experienced it. And so it's like when you said earlier, oh, they know the history and this is why they're fighting against it. I mean, my blood was boiling because I'm thinking, because I want to believe they don't know the history, right? I want to tell myself that, because it's worse to think that you actually know the history and then you are the fear and the fragility and the actual like lack of talent and, you know, skill and all the things that would put you in a position to fear the truth. Because a lot of this conversation, what I've been thinking about is like truth and reconciliation. You know, they did that in South Africa. They let people come and sit and cry and say, this is what y'all did to me. This is what happened. Like having that, like we're gonna air it out and let it be mourned. Yet we have to take it to our art, to our music, to our clothes, to just try to air it out. And because there's no space for it. Because literally there's people out there who know the history and are so fearful of losing their little position that, you know, they have bought into the idea that they actually own it, deserve it, earned it. Like what? Anyways, like I could go on, but just saying like it kind of blows my mind a little bit.
No, it reminds me of this clip that was going around like on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, and there were these two little kids, and there was an older brother and a younger brother, and they're both white. And maybe like the older kid was maybe like 5, like 6. Yeah, and then like the younger brother was like 4, and the older brother was like, do you know that in this country, like Black people are treated badly because of their skin color, and they're treated bad by white people? And then the younger kid goes, well, are we the white people? He's like, yeah. The younger kid goes, phew!
It was so
That is whiteness.
Yeah.
They know.
Yeah.
They know. So it's like, okay, I want to educate you. What happens is, what I've seen happen is like, oh, we're going to educate you. And instead, what you're going to do is get the grant to go do the research where I'm from, write the paper, get the credit for the work, go teach it in a system, in academia, an all-white place that doesn't accept Black students, and then just to be like, and keep your kids in these private schools that are only for your kids, just so you can, in your all white neighborhoods, and then your children will gentrify the formerly Black neighborhoods. And it just seems like there's a whole lot of education. A lot of white liberals are educated,
No, it's true. Yeah.
but they're not sharing it. And they want to be the ones who own it, whether it's like owning the wealth or owning the right to be able to have the authority to talk about whatever it is.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me of is during the BLM protest, me and my friends organized a protest in Manhattan Beach because we went to Maricosta High School. I hated that school. Oh my gosh. by the time I was a senior, I would just eat lunch in the art room because I was just done with talking to those horrible kids. Like, I was like, none of you are my friends. You're all racist. Like, I'm just gonna eat lunch in the art room and go. So that's why we kind of went back, because there were more Black kids entering the school and we wanted to, I guess, raise some awareness, because I was honestly shocked at the ignorance down there. Anyways, it was super interesting because we had all this like outward support, right? Like a couple thousand people came to the protest, and then there are people who were in the community that reached out to us to try to help with like media and photos and stuff. But I remember this one guy, his name was Richard. He had taken photos of our protest and then he published prints without crediting us. And he raised $10,000 and donated it to the BLM organization. Like, okay, so he asked, we found out he had this fundraiser, and we reached out to him and we were like, hey, like, that's cool if you made this fundraiser, but where's the money going? And also, can we have credit for our event organization? And then he was like, oh, I actually wanted to get your input on where we should donate it to. And we gave him like a comprehensive list of places where the money would actually like benefit Black people, and then he turned around and just donated it to BLM, the organization, and we're like, hey, like this organization's pretty shady, and like just because it has the name, that doesn't mean that you should do it, and we're actual Black people that are telling you how this could help us, and you're not listening to us. And they're like, well, the money already went there. And then there was this restaurant, there's this chain of restaurants down there called Sharky's, and their dress code is no do-rags, no chains, no Jordans, no sports jerseys, no skinny jeans. No skinny jeans, basically.
Sharky's Grill?
Yes, basically no Black people. And that's posted on all of their, all of their restaurants at that time. And then, but white people would be in there with no shirt, no shoes. When they would like literally have the no shoes, no shirt, no service sign. But if a Black person pulls up in a Bulls jersey, they're against dress code. But it's like a really chill restaurant, so it's very clear that it's racist, and they're basically like no Black people. So we raised this issue, and because we had a page that had a few thousand followers at the time, so we raised this issue. Sharky started getting a ton of flack for that, and they immediately changed their dress code because they were like, we don't want to get canceled. But then this man, the same dude who did the fundraiser, he was like, I'm a DJ at Sharky's and this is ridiculous. Like, you guys are taking this too far. That's not racism. I was in support of your movement before, but you guys have gone too far. And it's just so quintessentially white. Like, I was just like, we're funny. Like, you should be a TV character. And we were going back, like, he had posted this whole thing on Instagram where he's like, don't support these people anymore. I'm like, you never even supported us in the first place. And I don't know what your intentions were with this, because I feel like they genuinely thought they were helping by, like, telling, like, I guess supporting the movement and raising money, but they still wanted to, at the end of the day, like, guide where the funds went and, like, how much we could say. When it's like, you're like a 40-year-old white dude who's grown up in the South for your entire life. We're probably the first Black people you've talked to in 3 years. Like, I don't know. It's just funny. It's hilarious.
You were talking a little bit about rest and I think the movement.
Yeah, I was talking about where I just was wanting to start the conversation about how do we feel about the conversation of rest and Black people needing to rest and the mission.
And I part of what I think I heard you talking about was looking at how past generations did some things versus the new generation. I have to admit that, in my opinion, if anybody is my age, and I've already shared that I'm in my early 60s, we weren't activists. We were the beneficiaries, because I was born in 62. So, 10, 15 years later, 1977, I'm in high school, what have you, I am the beneficiary of all of that hard work and didn't realize it. So I am in like the first 7 or 10 classes of a high school that's really competitive in New York City that used to be all boys. So I think that my generation actually rode in on the lap of luxury. And that I think, I can't really speak for my generation completely, but I think that we had an unparalleled access to material comfort. So I'm in graduate school, in business school, when the market crashes and the junk bonds and what have you. We were literally living like the roaring 20s. There was investment banking money everywhere. So I'm only sharing that history with you to, just not be hard on yourselves. Everybody is doing what they can, where they can at the moment that they're doing it. And you're really responding, I believe, to the space that you're in. And so you do what you have with what is in front of you. Don't measure whether or not you are active enough or not active enough based on what you saw before you, because the circumstance was different. So Jim Brown just passed away on Friday. LeBron James holds him up, and I appreciate that because I think Jim Brown was one of the rare, like a Bill Russell, who tried to straddle a lot of different fences and make sure that they brought Black people along. But LeBron James exists in a different world, and he's doing his best within his world. And I think that he is doing a fantastic job. But people will, get on him because he's making money through Nike, which makes money by doing whatever they do in Asia and blah, 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 blah. But his world is different. And nevertheless, I think that he is trying to be part of a productive conversation and a recognition that he doesn't get to be LeBron James without the people in this room and other people. So I really mostly want to share with everyone who is young, give yourself a break. That's what I think rest means. Even God says to us that you must rest. Many spiritual people say, plan your rest, plan your leisure, make the space for Sunday. And just don't be too tough on yourself. Don't look in the mirror and spend too much time criticizing, maybe I should have, maybe I didn't. You're probably doing your best. And I would say that align with the people who can fill in the gaps for you sometimes. Sometimes there's only, and don't criticize the person that doesn't go march. Maybe what they will do best is keep the mailing list. They will keep the database, and don't give them a hard time because that's what they can do. Because each one of you, I think, or each one of us in a community serves our own special purpose. And just because we see it looking one way on the outside doesn't mean that that's what it is. So give yourselves permission to be imagined as yourself within this context. Because I think sometimes we unimagine each other.
Can I affirm that? I have never once heard a person from your generation say I rode on the coattails of like the movement and got to rest. And that's very affirming to me.
That is that rest.
No. Well, but I appreciate that because I think my particular generation is soft life, more rest inclined. And I think about that experience as my ancestors imagining. They wanted to rest so bad, like me experiencing that is actively living, right, like their imaginations. But I appreciate the connection across generations because I feel like people are like, feel like it's a very new concept, like it's quite modern to express rest and like be like deep in it and commit to that. But I appreciate you kind of even just saying like, you were in a position, you know what I'm saying, because of those before you to have liberties and have a lot of privilege. And so I really appreciate that because, when I look at my parents who are probably under your generation, they did not get to rest, but that's why I actively participate in that because my hope is that in a couple generations, it's not gonna be weird to take a sabbatical, okay, when I want to take a sabbatical and have island time within capitalism and consumerist culture and all of that. So I really relate to what you're saying, and I very much so value that, especially coming from you and like your lived experience in your generation.
And I think that older generations also had the benefit of a community that wasn't as mobile as it is now. So we have families that have folks all over the country, whereas we used to all kind of grow up in at least the same city. So Sunday, if you had family dinner, everybody was there, and in some ways that gave us a space to rest because we could lean on somebody would play with the kid, you didn't have to like change all the diapers or what have you. And I think that the hard part now is having to create a community of people that you can rely on so that you can feel a space of rest.
Just to add on to what I was saying, the only reason why I was bringing it up was because in context to the conversation on reparations and understanding what would be necessary for us to have to reimagine ourselves in this society, I was wondering and questioning if the conversation of rest has been capitalized on in a way in which we're unable to do the things that would be necessary. And not because I'm not advocating for rest, I think I'm a part of the soft life community. But at the same time, it does, I've even, for example, as a woman who's ambitious, who has things, who's an entrepreneur, I've battled with the conversation of soft life and rest, where I felt like, am I being overtly ambitious? Am I being too much now in my masculine? Because I aspire to have legacy and I aspire to have that as a woman. And so, and I question things. And so sometimes the conversation seems complicated to just be yourself and to be yourself and educated and maybe be an activist and maybe, have these things. And so that was like my question is how we're feeling with that.
I definitely want to jump into this because I was just having this conversation with somebody. So there's this girl who I follow, she's an entrepreneur, and she posted this video on Instagram, and she said that she was on a date with this man, and she asked him why he liked her, and he said he liked her ambition and drive. So she said she was gonna go to the bathroom, and then she walked out on the date. And she said, I don't want a man who likes me for my masculine, I want a man who likes me when I'm feminine and soft. And I think the concept of soft life has been co-opted, especially for Black women. It's just a rebranded form of patriarchy that Black women are choosing. But what I realized is the reason why that's happening is because Black women have never been regarded by white America as feminine. Because for instance, femininity to white women is being demure and you don't do things like you're a housewife, you're a part of the domestic system, and the man's supposed to do all of the quote unquote hard work, right? That has a lot of flaws, as we know. But Black women, in slavery, we worked as hard as any man. Also, our bodies have been not regarded as feminine, our features haven't been regarded as feminine. So I feel like Black women also are tired of being told that we're strong for suffering. So then I think they see a glamorized version of white femininity where patriarchy kind of upholds white femininity, and they get these certain benefits, of course, but there's also lots of disadvantages to those benefits, which is why white women fought so hard against it. And that's why the second wave white feminist movement was so focused on independence and financial independence, because the glamorization of the soft life is really just an exercise in control over men. Men were being able to financially control women. And so it's a very transactional relationship. And so now I see Black women are wanting to have access to that form of, I guess, quote unquote femininity, because on the outside it looks like these women are being taken care of and they're having everything paid for, but there's a price, which is often sex, and like that means that your body is being commodified, and somebody is literally gets to buy you, and you have no independence. Like if you don't have money, if you can't take care of yourself, then you're at this other person's, disposal. But yeah, I just think it's really interesting because to me, soft life really just means you don't have to struggle in certain ways as a result of like your place in this world. And the soft life that's being peddled to Black people, I think can reinforce that struggle in a lot of ways.
I mean, I think, just to push back just a little bit, but I think all of these things have been co-opted, right? Like we see BLM, Black Girl Magic, Rest. I think there was like another one that was mentioned. And so I think, maybe because I'm a little I guess a little older than I realized, but
How long you been on? How many presidents? Because I definitely, for me, the rest conversation and soft life are separate. So
Yes.
rest conversation,
yes.
and I feel like what I felt when you asked what you asked was more about like community, and I was thinking about my experience with this show versus my previous show where it was me and another Black woman, and we both kind of have an attitude of, let me do it, which is exhausting and stressful. And then this experience has been like, oh, we're all doing it together, and it's been a lot. I was able to like get my nails done. And so for me, as someone who saw my mom like work herself so hard and and for a long time it was something that I admire, but now it's like something that I want both of us to work on, like letting go a little bit. I let go a little bit with this idea of perfectionism and like that I have to prove these things. I have to prove these things to my younger self. I have to prove these things to like this and this. And I was like, just put on the show, and I think it still came out good. So for me, rest for me on a personal level is not like you were saying, like not being so hard on yourself and giving yourself space to be imperfect, and which is I think is very different than the like was probably is going to be capitalized like hashtag rest, like some hotel is going to be like rest for Black girls, like I mean, whatever it's going to turn into, And it's gonna be in Inglewood.
Exactly.
And we're not gonna own it.
Exactly. But it's like, what does rest to me mean? Because I think when you were saying in the back about the ancestors and like their experience, I hadn't really, something about it that just hit me. I've heard that before, obviously, but like something about that hit me now, just thinking about the actual physical exhaustion and just being like, I'm tired and never getting that.
Right.
And so I think we have to let that conversation not be capitalized,
Right.
because that's like a very real, like I just felt that viscerally today, and I've never really felt that before when I see that quote, but yeah, I think it's about, and I'll wrap this up, it's after 5, but I think it's about community and leaning on each other, and I think that's really the antithesis of capitalism, of individualism, being like, you do this, we do this, what are you good at, what do you want to do, like, and everybody works together to give ourselves, so that's how you literally end up with rest and getting your nails done. So, thank you everyone for coming.